Thanks for joining me for this short P3 webcast on how to pass this subject. Now, if you listen to my P1 webcast, you may have well heard me talking about what I hear students talking about P1 and P3 sort of being similar in the sense they're a little bit dry subjects. And I think one of the problems that students face when they approach P3 is that it covers quite a few areas that perhaps you're not familiar with within your sort of working life. You know, things like strategy formulation or perhaps benchmarking or perhaps technical models, SWOT, etc., etc. So I think the starting line is quite important for you. In other words, your sort of mindset in relation to the subject. You know, it is a fairly substantial text, and I think the thing that you need to do is to say, well, you know, I've got to get through it, and you know, albeit for the fact it's a new subject, it may well be an interesting subject. So I think keep an open mind. In relation to P3. That'll probably help your studies over the course of time and help you pass the paper. Okay, so as I've said, quite a few new areas for you. It's sort of linked in a sense into P1. It's very much a written subject, and you know you're required to sort of advise and report. We are into the professional level now, so you've got to show what I would call sort of application skills. You know, the examiner is going to give you a set of scenarios. He's going to ask you to have knowledge and apply that knowledge to certain situations and produce professional answers, professional reports, etc., etc. So I guess that the sort of the lack of experience may put people off, a lack of knowledge about certain areas within the P3 syllabus. And I think the other area is that in terms of your choices of subjects at ACCA, it may well be that you try and combine P3 with another subject, which I guess gives you just sort of more work to do. I would certainly advise that. I think P3, if you put the hours in and you start on the right foot, is a very, very passable subject on first attempt. But hours are required because, as I say, it's a fairly large syllabus area. And given that it may well be in areas or cover areas that you're not familiar with, I think time is important. The amount of time that you put in to P3 and also the type of study that you do. My experience of dealing with P3 is that students tend to spend a lot of time reading, and in fact it's the same with P1, and unfortunately reading is not really going to help you. You have to read the text, perhaps you have to make some notes, but really what you've got to do is you've got to try and display or practice your application skills. Yeah. So in other words, you've got to be able to review a scenario that the examiner gives you and apply knowledge. So, for example, apply technical models, perhaps apply the area of benchmarking, the SWOT, the Mendelow's, etc., etc. So, given that these are new to you, you need to know them really well to be able to deal with, a pressurized exam situation and to show those application skills. So, a certain amount of knowledge is required, but certainly applying what you know at this professional level is very, very important. I would sort of urge against sort of listening to sort of scaremongering about this subject. I've certainly heard quite a few students talk about it in perhaps a slightly negative sense. I think it's an interesting subject in certain areas, and I think it will be very much what you make it. I think one thing to bear in mind, obviously, is this area of other subjects. In other words, other subjects that you're doing. So what I would do is I would certainly be inclined to take on P3 with another subject. I think it's very, very doable as long as you're prepared to put in the hours into it, okay? And just to guard against spending a lot of time reading. You've got to do questions, okay? So in terms of the how you would do questions, I mean, I would spend, to be honest with you, at least 60% or 70% of your time at doing Q&A. Yeah, in other words, honing in your application skills. I'd certainly avoid study areas that I've mentioned, reading being one, and also making notes being another. I would get straight into the questions at the earliest possible point, and certainly what we do at ACCA Belfast for all our subjects is to try and make the subjects or the subjects that we cover, try and cover them by doing questions rather than just sort of bombarding you with a lot of information. That can make for a very, very long day, and we try and get the discussion going in the classes as well. So in that way, I found certainly that the subject sort of comes alive a little bit, and it's a little bit easier to deal with, and you're going to learn a lot more. So do that also, regardless of where you study, in your own study time. Try and think about the subject. What does it mean? The more questions you do, the better you're going to get at dealing with that type of scenario. Okay, so professionalism. I mean, as I mentioned at the start of this webcast, this is the professional level. Aside from being able to apply knowledge, and you will have to do that, as I've said, you've got to show within this paper your professionalism. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, really, what I mean is that when you lay answers out within the P3 exam, you've got to prove to your marker or prove to the examiner that you are a professional person. I had exactly the same slide within P1. In fact, you could use it across the P papers. Is you've got to prove, you've got to show that you can write a report using professional language, lay it out well, present well, and really sort of start and close well. These sorts of skills at the professional level are extremely important and can be the difference between passing and failing. I've seen a lot of students over the years that sort of say that that they'll present well on the day, and unfortunately that doesn't happen with all the stresses and strains that you have. So one of the key areas within P3 is laying out professional answers with professional language, and showing the marker that you have the skills to be part of this sort of elite group, the elite ACCA group. Okay, so good luck with your P3 exam. Hope that you'll watch my P3 sample webcast as well on content. Wherever you study, just make sure that you use question practice within P3 as the core element, okay? Avoid reading and making notes because they really won't help you too much on the day. And to be honest with you, they're a lot easier to do, and I think that's why students, me included over the years, have sort of erred towards reading and making notes. Get yourself into questions on the P3 text at the earliest possible point. It is a pretty big text. You need to plan well, get through chapter by chapter, and try and bring the subject alive. In other words, try and think about what they actually mean. So start on the right foot. And thanks for listening to me.